I'm not going to reclaim the host. Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the Filmmaker's Life. Actually, could you just stop the recording 1 second? Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the Filmmaker's Life. My name is Joanne Butcher, and I am a business coach for filmmakers, and I've been doing this interview series ever since COVID started. And I suddenly realized that I could actually catch a lot of my filmmaker friends because they weren't on set and they weren't flying around the world. And so I was able to pin them down finally. And then we just liked it so much that we kept going. And so we've been doing it for a while, for a couple of years now. And we just talk to filmmakers about how they're actually having their filmmaking careers. And one time early on, I invited one of my friends who's well known as a producer, I guess. And he said, oh no, but you know, I'm still doing some consulting work. And so, you know, I'm not full-time as a filmmaker. And I was like, oh, please. You know, I think most filmmakers are, you know, patching it together with this and that. So I think that's perfectly normal. There's some very weird feedback today. You know what? I'm going to mute Emily, see if that helps. So today we have Michael Lees as our guest. And Michael, that is a really fabulous space that you're in, with that beautiful wooden roof there. What is that space that you're in?
So this is the yoga studio at Jungle Bay Resort in Dominica. And we just finished an interview for National Geographic about marine life and the oceans.
And can you tell everybody here, I think everybody on the call is an American, so can you tell everybody where Dominica is?
Yeah, so Dominica is in the Eastern Caribbean. It's between two French islands of Martinique and Guadeloupe. Small-ish island, about, I think, 26 miles long, but because it's all mountains and valleys, it's actually, if you flattened it out, it's actually a lot bigger than you think. So people always come here thinking that on shoots that we can go from this place to this place, and it's like, no, we can't. We can't.
And how did you end up in Dominica? How did that come about? Because you're Trinidadian, right?
Mm-mm.
No. Where are you
so my mom is originally Bayesian from Barbados, but she grew up in the UK from about age 3 or 4. And my dad is from the UK. And most of my mom's family, actually, like a lot of Caribbean families, are all based in Canada, the US, and the UK. But it was when I was approaching 5, my parents decided they wanted a different sort of lifestyle to what they had in the UK. And they were looking at all different kinds of places. What they had almost settled on was a farm in
I think he is.
And never looked back.
We had a pause. Because I think the Wi-Fi lost. So
okay. Oh, was it on my end? Do we know?
No, I think it might have been Michael because he was frozen.
Okay.
Oh, really?
Okay.
It was,
I was
funny.
frozen. I think
Joanne
it was me.
frozen
I think it was me.
well.
Yeah, I think it was on my end. I just changed to a different Wi-Fi. So, okay, they decided that they wanted a different life than their UK life. So then what happened?
So they were looking at a farm in Guadeloupe, and on the in-flight magazine, my dad ended up seeing Dominica and thinking that it looked amazing. And we ended up here instead with no prior family connections or anything else. And we've been here about 25 years now.
Wow. And what's the local language there?
So English is the main language, which was a lot easier transitioning to than if I had to be a little French farm boy.
French from,
but
yeah.
there's also French Creole is also spoken.
Ah, and is that spoken by the very, very old people, or is it generally spoken?
I would say the older people and more so in the country. Yeah, but there's definitely national pride in trying to having more people relearn this sort of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really nice. Okay, well, I'm going to ask you the question that's usually the first question I ask. So when did you first know that you were a filmmaker?
I wonder if it was right after I quit business school. I guess that's when I had to make the decision. That's started to know. Yeah. So I'd gone to University of North Carolina as a business major, and once you do your how do you call it, like pre-business requisites, whatever, and then you actually get admitted into the business school. And I was always interested in like social impact, environmental impact. Like part of the reason I got into business was because I saw that business seemed to be one of the most sort of efficient drivers of change. But whenever I talked about this in class, a lot of times it was kind of waved off, or, oh, we're going to talk about it at the end of the year, and it would never come up. And then I had a really great entrepreneurship professor called Jim Kitchen, and he did two things. One, he told me that you can make a business out of anything. So if you find what you really love, there's a way to make a business out of that. And second, he brought in this speaker, and I can't tell you what she said. It was sort of like a life motivational speech. I don't remember what she said. All I know is that at the end of it, she asked, what are you going to do to get your life on track? And from whatever she said, I'd had a flash forward of being in like a middle marketing job or something at 40 years old in a business I didn't care about. And I was just like, oh, I'm going to kill myself if I stay on this. So when she said, what are you going to do? I raised my hand in the middle class and I said, I'm quitting business school. And then I had to figure out what's next and what's realistic. And I ended up choosing film. It was kind of between film, philosophy, and political science. And I thought, poli-sci is too much red tape. Philosophy, you're not engaged enough. I was like, film, I'd already been interested in, seen all my dad's photographs traveling around, watch a lot of documentaries. And to me, film was an opportunity that I could keep exploring different ideas in different films. And for me, I'm endlessly curious and want to engage with the public as well. So that's
very
how that came
interesting.
about.
I love that one of your choices was philosophy, because I wrote down what your teacher said, you can make a business out of anything, because I think making a business out of philosophy would be challenging.
That would be challenging, yes.
Challenging, but you know what? It would be kind of fun to brainstorm and try and come up with something, you know. But I also think that having a business background and then going into film is really, really valuable, because so many filmmakers, I think there's two ways that I see it. One is that filmmakers are not thinking about the business side of things, they're thinking about the filmmaking. But the other side of it is that even when filmmakers really have excellent skills around money or business or things like that, they sort of make a big separation and think, oh, that's over there and film is over here. But putting the two together, you know.
Definitely.
And then also it was interesting, you were saying about you thought of business as being the fastest way to create change, you know, but the teachers were not really interested in.
No. I did luckily have a couple, so I ended up leaving the business major and then bring it down to a business minor. And then in that time, I did end up in some I can't remember what they were called, but sort of like business ethics and sustainable business classes where that was talked about, but it was how that ethos was not spread throughout any of the other sort of like mainstream classes at all.
Yeah, there's probably schools that specialize in social entrepreneurship or things like that.
Yeah.
But really, that's what all filmmakers are, is kind of social entrepreneurs. You know, I always say, even when a filmmaker is making, you know, a horror film, still, I think storytelling is still something that is very life affirming and life changing. And so
Definitely,
it doesn't make it, somebody could be doing something that's very social impact, to me, that very social impact oriented, or as I said, it could be you know, a thriller or a horror film or a children's film, but I think it's all very life impacting, and just the ability to tell a story, I think is so significant. So so you decided on film, and there you were in, oh no, you were in North Carolina. So what did you do when you made that decision? How did you start?
Well, I ended up enrolling in the communications department and fast tracking onto the, what was it, the media production path. There was a couple of courses I really had to fight to, since I made that change in, I guess, my junior year. I had to, felt like I had to play catch up, and I'm thankful actually for that feeling of having to play catch up, because I feel like it kind of lit something under me to really keep pushing it up to this day. But yeah, enrolled in those classes. I got to take a bunch of cool different classes. One of my favorite though was actually a first-person documentary class taught by Julia Hazlitt. And obviously some of that, I think, translated into work like Uncivilized down the line. Experimental film classes, film theory. And
what does first-person documentary mean to you? Right,
so there's some different modes of it, but pretty much it is a documentary where the filmmaker is present. So, you know, there's obviously films where you don't necessarily know the voice of the filmmaker themselves, whereas this one is much more sort of involved. Either it's somewhat about the filmmaker, or if not, you know that it's being filtered through them and their opinion or their voice. So I mean, for instance, Michael Moore is probably a well-known example of a classic first-person documentary. He is telling the story, also it's his character, his voice on screen. Then there's one of my favorite was a film called Sherman's March. What's the guy? Do you remember his name?
I don't, because I don't think, is it Alexis?
No. I can't remember the name, but it's a very funny film. It's basically this guy goes to sets out to make a documentary about General Sherman's march through the South and the Civil War. But his girlfriend ends up breaking up with him right before, and it basically turns into sort of like an odyssey of him with his camera, exploring spaces and being with his family in the South and dating, his escapades, dating or whatever, but yet still then tying in, you know, Sherman's history and all this kind of stuff. But it was, to me, very interesting, very vulnerable and very honest, even though of course there's always a facade where, you know, this man is having these interactions with women and then sort of quite literally, I guess, bearing his soul of how he's feeling and his vulnerabilities and everything else. So there's that, and there's lots of others. Sarah Polly is another one that I think is amazing. Stories We Tell is, to me, like one of the best documentaries I've ever seen in my life. I won't say more about it, but I would definitely recommend anyone who likes film in general to check it out.
Yes, nice. The way just yesterday, I was talking about this to somebody, but when I first left England, which was in 1983, I think it was, I went to Spain and then I came to America a year after. But right when I left England, there was what I thought was a shocking shift in documentary. So I grew up with Sir Richard Attenborough, David Attenborough, you know, these BBC nature documentaries with somebody with a terribly plummy upper class British accent, you know, and I don't remember his name, but right when I was leaving England, this guy became really popular who was doing nature documentaries. But whereas Richard Attenborough, even though I remember Richard Attenborough in a bat cave, you know, and talking about the guano on the floor, I always felt that he was a little protected from it. But he had a big bushy beard and he had this very northern English accent. And I just remember him wading around in this river and having his hands in the mud, and he'd be like, well, you know, we've got to get down here in and oh, that's not a northern English accent, but anyway, and you know, and he had this funny accent, and he was so funny, and he became this, you know, big celebrity overnight. And to me, that was this huge change from this kind of voice of God documentary.
Right.
It wasn't really a first person documentary, but it was such a shift to having this type of character. And then after I left, my mother, when she was alive, she would save things for me to watch. And I remember she showed me this documentary. It was a BBC documentary, and it was about a young woman who had inherited a collection of letters from her great-grandmother. And her great-grandmother, through reading these letters, her great-grandmother had gone on a journey to Iran, I think it was. Something like that. Something like where, like, what's this 19th century English woman going to Iran from? And then the documentary was this young woman following the story of her great-grandmother's journey. And I was living in America. I wasn't seeing anything like that.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, what's happening with documentary storytelling, and why I'm not seeing it here, but it's happening in England, and what's going on, you know? So what do you think are the, I think of it as like the rules of the genre, but because I don't know if I'm explaining myself, but I think like if you're watching a horror film, there's, you know, the filmmaker can play with the rules, but we enjoy the rules. You know, what are the rules of first-person documentary storytelling?
I guess in some sense, I mean, it is quite flexible, and there's, like I said, there's different variations. I mean, I think on the one hand, for it to be first person to some degree, there needs to be an involvement of the filmmaker. So whether you don't necessarily have to be on screen, but whether it's through your voice or knowing or informing the audience that, like, for instance, you might not necessarily be a reliable narrator or something like that.
Right.
All different sort of ways like that. But I mean, at the end of the day, it still comes down to still telling a story, and sort of the structure of story never really changes that much. And also, I guess once you set up your,
what does that mean?
So in a traditional sort of film, even though first person can be quote unquote a non-traditional form of documentary, still often it'll have its beginning, its middle, its end, its inciting incidents, its resolutions, all that kind of stuff. And then also I was gonna say, like, whatever sort of facade or what's the word? Construct or whatever
persona?
Whatever you're using. No, not persona. Like a tool, whatever conceit or facade or whatever you're using, you have to kind of stick within the rules of that. So you establish your world and kind of how it operates, and for the most part, you're working within that, unless you're, again, intentionally doing something to draw attention to breaking it. But to sort of set up a construct one way and then not really stick with it and just be flip-flopping will, I think, just confuse things and muddy your story.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting that documentary storytelling still is storytelling.
Exactly.
Story.
So I mean, even when I was doing my film Uncivilized, which is a first-person documentary, I had to, so many times, even while I was in the forest, I'd have my notebooks and I'd be trying to figure out what the story is. You know what I mean? Where is it going? Because obviously you're capturing footage, things are changing all the time, but you're still trying to find a unifying story arc that goes through the film and can lead your audience from one place to another. What's interesting is I myself in that film, I'm going on a journey from one place to another. So I have to figure out where I'm going. As I figure out where I'm going, then I have to figure out how to bring the audience along.
Yes. So when you're making a first-person documentary, but you haven't got there yet, and you don't know what the end of the story is.
It's very kind of like being lost. It's like you're getting lost all the time, and then having to find your way back on a path. And at first, I mean, I was terrified at first, because you're making a film and you don't know where it's going. You know, that goes against, especially, let's say, fiction film, totally goes against it. But it's almost like you're writing. It's like writing. You're writing while you're filming, essentially. Yeah.
So back in North Carolina, and you took the class, what was the first film you actually made?
First film I made was a documentary called Human + - Nature. And it's funny, it's kind of similar thoughts. Obviously, a lot rougher and a lot less interesting. But it was basically thinking about man's relationship with nature, especially having grown up in Dominica and then being in the States for college, and knowing that in many ways the States was seen to be like what we should be aspiring to. And then realizing that in many ways, you know, there had been a severance between the average person's relationship with nature. And so I think I ended up visiting an intentional community called Earth Haven in the what color mountains is it? I can't remember what. Right.
I don't know. I'm geographically challenged.
Cool. Well, anyway, over towards Carborough, not Carborough. Oh God, saying geometry, geology, geography. Anyway, it's mountains in North Carolina. There's a cool intentional community, and it's very much sort of like eco-focused, and they think about how the community works between themselves as well. So obviously they're building with natural materials, building in ways for natural ventilation, using sustainable renewable energy, and then like the way they operated was like using consensus democracy. And to me, this was interesting as well, starting to think about, like, I always was starting to think about how there's different systems, like just having, for instance, like renewable energy is not going to make you sustainable, and it's not going to be necessarily a life-giving philosophy. So I was essentially kind of looking for systems and philosophies that would be good for humanity and good for the earth. Thinking about Dominica, and then looking for alternatives as well in the States.
Yeah. It's interesting having that dual perspective. I've lived in the States for a long time. I grew up in England, but then I've spent a lot of time in Trinidad, and so always here, you know, Americans think this is the way it is, you know. But it's not. There are many other versions of
life and reality. Yeah.
Democracies,
Yeah.
ways of thinking about the world, and
Yeah.
and especially thinking about work. I think it's
Yeah.
pretty
Yes.
um, but so when did you decide to leave the States and go back to Dominica and continue filmmaking there?
So I graduated in 2015, and I decided to I did an internship in the UK for a summer, and then I decided to
I
move
don't know,
to
film company.
a small production company in Shoreditch. So it was mostly music videos and commercials. Ended up on some shoots with like Franz Ferdinand and Glass Animals and some other bands, which was really cool.
Nice.
And then I decided to move to New York with my girlfriend at the time. Basically, I could stay in the States for a year. And then my plan was to do that and then most likely come to Dominica for a little bit and then let me see. We froze. Oh, you good?
We lost you for a second, but yeah.
Okay. I was saying I was thinking of going a year in the States, then Dominica for a little bit, and then back to the UK. But things obviously changed. But it was actually while I was at the end of my senior year and then during my time in New York that I had this idea for this experience of Uncivilized and pretty much of trying to go and live off the land. And the original idea was to do it with a small group of friends and to try and sort of like trace mankind's journey from where he may have started in either what some would have called the original Garden of Eden, or others might say like, you know, the brutish nastiness of nature, to current civilization, but also this like inflection point where we've almost destroyed the earth. But while I was in New York, I did a couple different internships. I got an internship at Billboard. I think, you know, Billboard, they do the music charts and stuff. So they also had a division doing video content. And then I also had an internship at a place called Sequential Brands, and they managed a couple different brands like Avia and One and some other clothing brands like that. And then I'm always looking to see what other people that I respect, to see what they're doing, to try and figure out what the course is. And there's this guy that I went to school with called Harper Owens. I always liked all of what he was doing. And I saw he'd got a job at a rental house. And so I went and I got a job at a rental house next to just get a feel of all the equipment and network and that kind of stuff.
What a good idea. I haven't heard anybody say that. That's a really good idea. Yeah, just handling equipment. It's great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and then I headed home towards the end of 2016.
And did you start on Uncivilized then? Did you start immediately working on that project?
So I'd still been, how would I say, brainstorming and trying to talk to some different companies and stuff while I was in New York. When I got home, I didn't start filming immediately. Let this car pass. I didn't start filming immediately. Actually, I got a job at a news company where I was working as a cameraman and a writer to basically save up to buy the last bits of equipment I needed. I wasn't able to get the production company we were talking to, we weren't able to get on board. And some of my friends that originally were supposed to do it, either them or their families were like, no, this isn't a great idea, and backed out. So in the end, it ended up being self-finance. And then I had one of my good friends come on a little bit later on to help me as a producer.
What was it like going to work for a news organization? Coming from, you know, because clearly you had an interest in first-person documentary storytelling. So is that like going into news?
You know, it wasn't so bad. It was actually, I think it was actually a great way to get reacclimatized with Dominica, because I'd essentially been gone for about 7 years. And so with this job, I got to go all around the island, cover a lot of different functions. So meeting all the different government officials and whatever else, and then find out, of course, what the sort of up and downs of the political issue were at the time. So I think, like most things, I just took it as an experience to have my hands on the camera, to be writing, to be making money, and to be trying something new, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, very smart. As I said, every time I do these interviews, I'm just like, wow, that was smart. Way to go, to keep going and keep moving your career along. It's awesome. Yeah. But yeah, it just seems to me, though, that news is a very different type of storytelling. They didn't put you in front of the camera, did they?
No, they didn't.
So you were behind the camera, but yeah, it's just a very different way of storytelling, and a different way of producing, because you have to get the story and get it out so fast. It's always that speed thing. Yeah. I mean, I always think filmmaking is the fastest work there is, but news is faster.
Really, yeah, absolutely.
That thing of turning it around in such a short time and not having the time to edit or think through things.
Yeah, definitely not my preferred space. It feels more like just like collection. Like you don't really, there's never any time to sort of get too artsy or intentional with a lot of your shots. It's like, all right, you got to go in, get your wide, get your medium, get your close up, make sure you get some B-roll, and then you're off to the next thing. But at least it is useful in that sense of just learning to think methodically like that, because even when you do have the opportunity to be more creative, it's still necessary to have that very sort of like functional, methodical way of thinking about things as well.
Right. Yeah. That's great. So back to your first feature. So I just was catching up with a client of mine the other day. He was going to make a documentary about man's relationship to nature, and he ended up making a fiction 30-minute short set in historic times, and it was shot on an uninhabited island in Alaska.
Nice.
And one of the lead actors was an 8-year-old boy.
Wow. That's cool. I would love to see that, by the way. Like, yes. That's my wheelhouse of stuff I'm interested in.
Yes, it's actually a true story about Rockwell Kent, his name is. So back in the 19th century, an Alaskan was living in New York trying to make his career as a painter. And he took his son on this journey back home to this Alaskan wilderness. And it was what sent him back into a new way of looking at painting and made his career.
That's amazing.
Yeah, as a nature painter. But there's the idea of making a film on this remote island. When you have to think about, that's what I saw when I was seeing your films. Like, you have to think about things like, I have to feed everybody, got to get the food in, everybody's got to be safe. I've got to get footage here and deal with all of the film things, but then you're also dealing with all of this outdoor experience issues. So please tell us the story of your film Uncivilized, because I know in that film you got a lot more than you bargained for.
Oh, you just froze up at experience.
Oh, I said just tell us about your experience with Uncivilized, because you had that. What I'm hearing is if you were just going to go and say, I'm going to live off the land for a few months, that's already a lot, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to shoot it as well. So please tell us the story. I can't wait to hear.
So at least I can't even imagine having to do that on a remote island and then having to feed crew and all of that. Because part of the thing with me was originally, like I said, it was going to be a small group of us, and it would be almost like a life experiment, living off the land as a unit. It didn't end up being a group, and it ended up being just me. So it was also like me not being able to, I knew I'd be able to find food, but me not being able to eat every day or eat the amount I want is a little different than I can't feed my crew. You know what I mean? But yeah, absolutely. So for the filming part, the stuff I had to consider, dry bags were key to keep cameras and stuff dry. I ended up getting a 17-watt solar panel that was about this size, hard panel, and a power bank. I'm actually still using the power bank right now. And then some fold-up solar panels as well, and chargers. I brought a Chromebook because I was like, I need something to transfer footage, and I need something also that's going to be rugged enough and not take up a whole bunch of battery and whatever else. So I ended up going with a Chromebook and an external hard drive. And so and obviously some different bits of audio equipment, GoPro, yada yada. And so yeah, I would essentially shoot, and then usually at night every couple of days, transfer my footage through my Chromebook onto my drive. A lot of times
I think we lost.
Obviously battery is such a premium that through footage on my camera or my laptop either. And then yeah, I mean, it was definitely a challenge, like, you know, trying to spend your day let's say catching fish, getting coconuts, getting river snails, then trying to start a fire. Like, I didn't realize how difficult, even with a lighter, starting fire would be when you're actually in the forest and everything is damp all the time. And so pretty much most days that I like cooked protein, like I was done after nightfall. Like, it would take me until then to do everything on top.
So,
yeah,
we just lost you for a second, but so are you saying it took all day to feed yourself? Is basically is that what you're saying?
It took all day. On days where I was getting protein, on days where I was gonna either cook fish or crab or anything, and I had to make a fire, all day. That's a whole day endeavor.
A whole day endeavor. Yeah. So what about the days you didn't have protein? What was that about?
Much more relaxed. I would, and because of that, I would probably eat. I read that basically you need to eat protein about 3 times a week. Sometimes I would get, I guess, lazy or cheeky with it and get down to 2 times a week, just because of how much work it was. And then on other days, I would be fruit, coconut, wild taro or dasheen, as we call it, wild berries, and then exploring, reading, writing, filming, other things around, and then doing things like building my shelter, and then of course once you've done it, then it's improving it, then making, let's say, a pillow out of like coconut husks, because after a while sleeping on the hard floor, you're like, I can do better than that. Carting sand up from the river to make it all. So it's this interesting thing, and to me, even though some of this didn't even make it to the film because the film took a slightly different turn, it was interesting to me to watch going from bare necessities and then start seeing what could be considered luxuries, but there's always a way to sort of improve things. And just as humans with the minds that we have, it kind of felt inevitable to me that we're never going to stay static. We're always going to keep moving and improving. I guess the question is, to what end, and is there a threshold where I don't know, in a sense, you've gone too far? Like, for instance, even as you're talking about work culture, right? Like in the States, having no vacation time and working crazy hours, it's like, cool, yes, you can work more and you can earn more, but if you've basically thrown out having a life with it, then did you really benefit? Or, and in this case, you know, maybe in certain instances, like living life in a more sort of primitive or natural state might be better for a lot of people, when you might be working in a system where no matter how much you work, you never actually see any way forward, because you're earning so little and your expenses are so high that you don't really have any safety net of savings or anything. And at which point you might as well be living in the forest with around nature and clean water and whatever else.
So what was the turn that happened that you were not expecting for your film?
So the big turn, which I was not expecting, was a Category 5 hurricane called Hurricane Maria. Someone did actually come to let me know that a hurricane would be coming, but at that point it was like a 1 or a 2, and I decided I was going to stay.
Who came to tell you? That's interesting.
A guy called Chriselle. So I have a friend, the Eco Lodge that was next door. Jem, who owns there, had somehow figured out how to find me once, and I guess he told Chriselle where to find me, and yeah, Chriselle came out to let me know that this was going on, and I told him I was gonna stay. As I said, it was a Category 1 or 2. I tamped down my shelter with some more coconut palm fronds and stuff, and hunkered down. And of course, it ended up being a superstorm that no one on island knew it was going to be what it was. So I'd been in the forest for 3 months at that time. The plan was 6 months. But yeah, that night, basically where I was in the forest between 2 rivers. And so at a certain point, you know, I was like, okay, this might not be a 1 or a 2. It might be a 3 or a 4. I don't know. But there's nothing to do at this point. Like, it's dark. If I run outside, I'm gonna get squashed by trees. I can't cross the rivers. You can hear the rivers have completely swollen. Like, you can hear boulders being tossed down them. And surprisingly though, like, I didn't get blown away because I have the forest as a windbreak. But still, every so often, the wind would just roar through, and I'd shine my light out, and if it was on if the wind was sustained for more than like a couple seconds, you would see the vines that I'd shine my lights out on, you'd see them go like this, parallel to the ground, and you saw that for a couple seconds, and then you start hearing cracks of trees coming down. And that was the panic moments, because you're like, yeah, any of these trees could theoretically come down. And I won't give it all away, but pretty much one did almost squash me, almost killed me. In retrospect, it kind of actually sheltered me, because the trunk missed, it clipped the corner of my shelter, and then a branch of it slowly squashed my shelter down to the ground. So I didn't get any scratches or anything, but I was then safe in a sense. And then the rest of the film is getting out water.
We lost you for a second. The rest of the film is what? The rest of the film.
Let me just put on my data instead of Wi-Fi and see if that's any better.
All I can say is I was in Miami for Hurricane Andrew, which was a Category 4 or Category 5, but the storms are obviously getting much bigger now. Every year they're getting bigger. And I was in a house. We did not lose our roof, but the roof was coming off. The first time it went, and then the eye came, and then it didn't come back. If it had come back, we would have lost the roof. But anyway, it was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. I cannot imagine being in a hut in the forest and going.
And then imagine as well, of course, I'm like, all right, this is insane. But also, I'm here making a film and I got to get footage of this. If I somehow I'm like, oh yeah, I just didn't get footage of the craziest experience of all time, I just have this hole, I'd be like, that's ridiculous. So
And there was
yeah,
a hurricane.
even in the hurricane, I had to whip out the camera every now and then when I could. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Amazing. Amazing. Well, thank God you survived. Does that list as one of the most terrifying experiences of your life? Hurricane Andrew.
Yes. Definitely one of the most terrifying. And the only other word I can give to it is like, it's psychedelic. Like, it's a psychedelic experience to be out in the forest, within the bare elements, and hearing all the sounds and feeling the wind blowing through, and then having this toss up of like, yeah, I may die, and what does that mean? And have I made peace with that? Like, trippy. And then even the aftermath. I mean, there are many people that said the same thing when they stepped out the next day. They thought they were the only person alive. But they said it was like being in a movie. And then it's this bizarre thing that I am in a movie. I'm making this movie while simultaneously feeling like life itself is a movie.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's a trip.
Amazing. So we've put the link to the film so everybody can see it and can go through the experience of a Category 5 hurricane. So what are you doing now? It turns out we find you on set today. So what are you doing now as a filmmaker? How are you paying the bills, and what are you working on, and what are you working on next?
So I'm actually really happy to be at a point where I am fully paying bills and everything is financially working out. It took a little while to get there, for sure. So 2017 was when I started Uncivilized. Basically, it came out 2019, 2020. And in that time, I managed to start getting some work. UNICEF was on the ground here post hurricane, and I ended up getting some work with them. And then I continued to get some I was freelancing. And then by 2020 is when I think I officially incorporated my company, One-Off Productions. And I would say in general was often doing videos for NGOs, oftentimes for impact and marketing of whatever programs they were working on here. And then it just kind of kept extending, at least for the video front. I was also doing photo work. And then it's been expanding to basically getting more and more interesting projects. So right now, where I am right now is, as I mentioned earlier, we wrapped shooting an interview for a National Geographic project, which I never thought in a million years that I would be shooting for National Geographic so soon. And they actually, I met them because I brought a Dominican friend who's a National Geographic explorer to do an intro to my film when there's the 5-year anniversary of Maria, and they happened to be on island, and then they loved what they saw. And actually, I think the film elements of it may be incorporated into the documentary they're working on. Wow. Anyway, ended up meeting them and yada yada. So that was back in October. In October, we provided production and fixer services for them, as well as some DP services. And then we're doing some pickup interviews and stuff now. We've worked with some 13 Degrees North is a production company in Barbados that we've worked with them, where they've worked with larger international clients like Royal Caribbean Cruise Line, and then they've come here and we've worked in conjunction with them, doing, again, production services in that case. And then other times we're actually doing the entirety of the films. So very recently, we just dropped a really cool piece on cassava, and it's kind of links to the indigenous community here. It's past and also what is happening with it now. So it was through Interconnect Life for Forgotten Lands. Forgotten Lands is a really cool Caribbean art collective. So there's a 1 minute version or a minute 30 version on Instagram, 5-minute version that just dropped. And then we also just got to do another interesting one. This was again for an NGO. It's called the Caribbean Agricultural Network, and they're funded in part by UNDP Jeff Small Grants Program. And this one was basically a project on cocoa. So they found out that there was unique types of cocoa on island here. Part of that was found out through research and then sending samples to Trinidad to be genetically sequenced, which is the first time that's been done, and found out that we have specifically very unique cocoa profiles for fine flavor. So they did a project where they taught farmers, proper planting, proper, grafting. Like I said, obviously the sequencing was part of it, and other different things like that. And so we kind of made about a 10-minute documentary for them. And that one was also, I'm always trying new stuff and seeing where we can go. And this one brought in a friend of mine who does animation. So when we're explaining the parentage of cocoa and how the genetics work, had her on board to be able to break that down in a way that's super easy for people to get. And that was a cool project. We just presented that recently. Prior to that, I had done this.
Hold on, let me see. I wanted to open it up for questions, if you don't mind.
Cool, not a problem.
But because I could talk about cocoa all day, but does anybody have a question? Just raise your hand. And Rebecca,
hi.
I haven't seen you for a while.
Thank you so much, Joanne, for holding this today. And Michael, this is just amazing. I haven't seen your film yet, but I look forward to it very much. Is there a single takeaway or maybe a collective of takeaways that you would like your audience to have come away with, or is it up to them? What's your feeling on that?
For the film?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess I'll sell it out a little bit, but it's really, to me, I realized that I'd been putting things on this sort of linear spectrum of, let's say, nature and civilization, or this linear idea of progress. And to me, now I think of it much more circular or spiral, and many times progress is sort of circling back to something before. And it's not that we're going backwards, it's that we're revisiting something with a newfound knowledge or appreciation. In other aspects, it can mean that the society or tribe or whatever that hasn't modernized into whatever some of our countries look like now, to me, I'm like, we don't have to force anyone to go in that track. The rest of the world has seen what some of these tracks lead to, and hopefully we can then have an appreciation for what these other sort of lifestyles are, and they don't have to sort of go on that whole journey of destruction to find themselves back. Although some people have said it's inevitable and that you have to go on that sort of journey and then self-discovery. But then, of course, also just that we are not sort of like masters or subordinators of nature, which is how I think it's often talked about, even in our Western Judeo-Christian societies. In the Bible, there's often this talk of like subduing nature, but to realize that also it's a matrix, and we are an integral part of it, and how we treat nature essentially has a huge impact on the repercussions on ourselves. It's obviously one huge connected thing. And yeah, pretty much, I mean, we're at a point where issues of climate change and the such aren't going to just dial back on their own. I think part of what you see in the film as well is, and it's a theme I want to continue exploring, is how do we still find happiness and meaning even if the world ends up changing, and at least in a sort of physical and environmental sense being less abundant and beautiful than it may have been earlier on in our lives.
Thank you.
Good to see you,
Thank you.
Rebecca.
I'll be reaching out to you soon.
Oh, good. Maeve, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for coming, Michael. I want to say, before I ask my question, I wanted to say I appreciate what you just had to say about living with, I may be changing your words around a little bit, but not fighting nature, learning how to live with it. Back when I was still healthy, I used to teach winter survival camping. So I can appreciate the opposite spectrum of what you went through, not counting the hurricane.
Yeah, brilliant.
But my question is, in your movie or in an upcoming project, do you go into more detail about the new kind of coconut?
The new kind of coconut?
I think it was cocoa. I think she means the cocoa.
Oh, the cocoa.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The only reason I know that, Maeve, is because I got very interested in cocoa because of in Trinidad and anyway, but I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
With the Dominica finding the cocoa that was genetically
Yeah,
Unique.
because to me that's fascinating.
yeah,
Yeah.
years ago when I started to tune into cocoa in Trinidad, it turns out that Trinidadian chocolate is regularly wins when they have these worldwide trade fairs and everything, regularly wins the #1 chocolate in the world. So it's a very, very, very highly flavored chocolate, and then it's often mixed with cheaper chocolate to improve the taste. But that to me was just a fascinating thing. So I think you something about Dominica chocolate, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we have super high fine flavor profiles. There's a couple of different issues that we face, which is like not having the infrastructure for production, and then securing markets and all that kind of stuff. I can't say that I'm necessarily at this point going to be making anything more about cocoa. I would tell you, I don't know if after this chat I can send you the link, Joanne, for the cocoa documentary, which is out now. Has a good amount of information in it. And then, like I said, the Caribbean Agricultural Network are a great resource as well for that. But like I said, within the film, it shows you some of the different families of different parentage of cocoa and how they're grafted and why the different attributes of the different ones, that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah. Most welcome.
Thank you. Feline, oh my goodness, look, one of my Clubhouse friends.
Greetings, everyone. So I wanted to check in about distribution. I had stepped away briefly, so I don't know if this was mentioned, but I know your film. I saw your film. I think it was maybe Third Horizon Film Festival or something of that, one of those. But I just wanted to know what your experience was between the COVID pandemic distribution and viewings and events compared to, outside real life, real-time type of connections. So if you can just, give us briefly your experience.
So it was cool that it got to come out just before lockdowns. So I managed to go to a handful of film festivals, which was, this was my first time, and at least having a film in, and it was fantastic. I had no idea that there were so many filmmakers and films they made in the Caribbean. So that was great. And then, yes, COVID hit. We had originally distributed with Studio Nancy, which is a branch of, or like sister company with Third Horizon. And honestly, they were really great. They helped us do a great launch. Even it was an online launch during COVID, and we had a whole sort of event through Facebook Live and everything else that I think went really well. Unfortunately, it felt like some of the infrastructure either wasn't quite there. So either way, we ended up going separate ways. Amicably, still love that team. Ended up then going with this other company called Passion River. Now, I had to do a whole bunch in terms of going through the contract and making sure everything is kosher, and then realizing that to go through a distributor like them, I needed to have all these different deliverables, like separate dialogue, music, effects tracks, and I had to update my poster and different metadata and all this kind of stuff. And then right as it took almost like maybe 6 months to a year to go through all of this process. And right after we were a go, found out that they got bought out by another company. And so we decided not to go with this other company, just for personal reasons. And now what literally I have to probably get this done in the next day or two is to go back. I don't know if you've ever heard of Quiver or Distributor. Yeah. They're basically like content aggregators. And instead, with someone like with regular distributors, let's say you get 60% and they get 40%. With the content aggregators, you pay a flat fee up front, and then they take a much smaller percentage afterwards. And then that will help you get onto things like iTunes and Google Play and all those things. But they also pitch to other platforms. And then there's also educational distribution platforms like Hoopla and Canopy, which they also pitch to. So that is where we're at now. I've had the on and off after Studio Nancy. I ended up posting it myself on demand on Vimeo, which I think was a pretty good option. Problem is we had to take it down when we were in. Pardon me? Today. Yeah, exactly. The thing is, we had to take it down when we were negotiating distribution. And then after all that fell through, I was like, I'm putting it back up there, because every day I would have people ask me, where can I see it? Yeah, it's tough. I will say I had no idea how much work it is on the back end, like the business distribution side of things, as the front end of filmmaking. But I think I've taken it all as a great experience to have an understanding of what the process is like from beginning to end. Because there's no point in making films if people aren't going to see them, for me personally. So getting to that final point where I'm like, all right, this film has a home where enough people can find it and interact with it is the finish line.
Well, as I said, I know Feline from Clubhouse. It's so good to actually see you, because on Clubhouse it's just audio. But that's why my Clubhouse room, I say all of the moderators have already been through the process of delivering a film to the distributor, because it's a piece that most filmmakers are not even aware exists. And so good job that you got through it. Also, maybe you and I should have a conversation, because I think that there are better deals out there than those aggregators. But, let's talk. Cool. I just have access. So, but great question, Feline, and good to actually meet you in person. So thank you everybody so much for coming, and thank you very much, Michael, for taking a break on your shoot day to talk to us. That's really awesome. And thanks for sharing that amazing roof behind you with us, because that is gorgeous. And I don't know, but that just says Caribbean to me. My stepmother's an architect specializing in historic preservation of Caribbean architecture. So I'm very spoiled about that sort of thing. But it's
Lovely.
cool.
I'm actually part of a group here working on that. We recently dropped a book called Still Standing, which tells the stories of some of these traditional tikais, small houses, and the people in them, especially because a lot of those houses survived Maria and David before. Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. I'd love to get that book. That would be such a cool
Yeah.
gift. But we'll talk, okay? And
Sure.
again, thank you so much for being here. Thank everybody for coming. It's always so great to learn from filmmakers who are out there doing it. So thanks for taking your time. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Emily.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for taking care of us, Emily. Bye-bye.